All right, gang, we're going to go ahead and get back into it.
There was nothing, none of these.
I do want to make a quick comment, though.
Think about it.
We have, of course, Cobbler from Sullivan's over here on the side, so make sure you get some of that. But apparently we have some amazing desserts from some of our new directors that are over here, so if any of y'all want to claim those at the moment, please let me know. There's an apple pie over there. There's looks like a strawberry frosted cake. There's red velvet cupcakes, which I don't even know what red velvet is. I mean, it's not a flavor, right? It's just a thing. But we can talk about that later. It's like pumpkin spice for me. It's a different issue. But some sort of chocolate, like German cake or something like that over there, which looks really awesome. So make sure you guys dig in, because this is the only time you're going to get to see this from our new directors, because I guess they only get to do it once. So we should really make it a thing where they do it every year.
Until we get another new one?
I'm thinking just like a director's bake-off
What's he been saying?
every year is what we should really figure out.
Is that ice cream?
I don't know.
Yeah, I've said that there. Fair. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump back into our tax rate information. We've gotten a good overview of the changes for the budget and the priorities. So now let's take a look at what the boxes are that the state lets us do, and what the options are on the table.
Okay, well, welcome back.
Welcome back. This next part of the presentation is going to go over the property tax calculations that are required every year by state statutes, provide some additional information, changes from prior year, some other observations, and then towards the end, there'll be a recommendation. So starting with the certified rolls versus certified estimates, you know the roller coaster that we've been on for the last several years with getting certified rolls. State statutes require that 95% of the property values be certified by the appraisal district before they can provide a certified roll. Changes to legislation back in 2021 allowed appraisal districts to submit a certified estimate if they're not able to provide a certified roll. And that's what we dealt with last year. And I'll provide some additional information later in my presentation that shows the impact that a higher amount of uncertified introduces uncertainty into the budget and the budgeting process. But for this year, we were very fortunate. Both Dallas and Denton appraisal districts provided certified rolls for the 23 tax year. In fact, Denton appraisal district was certified at almost 98%. So where last year their certified rolls were about, uncertified portion was about $2 billion. This year it's about $200 million, so about 1/10 of what it had been previously. Again, the higher percentage of certified rolls increases our level of confidence in budgeting for the property tax. So one of my primary jobs throughout the year is to calculate the truth in taxation rates, and these are very important. They're very specific on what cities are required to do. So there are 3 rates that we're required to calculate every year, and it's a very involved calculation. We have a lot of eyes on it, and we also throw it back to Denton County Property Tax Assessor's Office to confirm those numbers. So we're not just relying on our own expertise, we're getting support from others. So the first is the no new revenue rate. That is the rate that generates the same amount of taxes as last year, comparing apples to apple property values. So they'll remove things like new property and make adjustments for contributions to the TIF district, the TERS. The no new revenue rate for the city for 2023 is 0.392761. The next rate that we're asked to calculate is the voter approval rate. This is the rate that is the highest allowable rate that a city can elect to approve before the automatic election kicks in. Now, previously, we received instruction from council that we were not going to move forward with the bond election, so we were going to live within the rate calculations that came from the tax rolls. So for 2023, our M&O voter approval rate for the city is 0.296117. The debt service rate is 0.122320. This is the debt service rate that council has elected to maintain flat. And we base all of our future GO bondings based on this rate. So those are the two other portions of the tax rate. We do have one more element that we add to the tax rate for calculation purposes, and that's the unused increment. Unused increment is the variance between a particular year's actual rate that's elected versus the voter approval rate. We have unused increment of 0.00642 that we can add to the calculated rate for the voter approval rate and the INS rate for debt service. So our total voter approval tax rate for 2023 is 0.419079. It's important to note that if we don't use the unused increment, we lose it. It's a rolling 3-year amount, and last year we used a big portion of our increment, unused increment, for maintaining our tax rate at 0.443301. So there's just a sliver left. It's going to fall off when the next year comes about. So that's why we threw that in there. This next table shows a comparison of values from the previous year to the current year, and there's 3 numbers that we're focusing on. Last year's certified net taxable total, and remember that includes the certified estimate that was provided by Denton. We have the 2022-23 final taxable value, which is the value after all the uncertified properties were resolved and have gone through the ARB appeal process. And then we've got the 2023-24 net taxable, which is for the current tax year. Last year, the certified value was $16.9 billion. That amount decreased to get to the final of $16.5 billion. So that just shows the amount of uncertainty that's in the tax rolls. So as the tax rolls were settled over time, they actually settled lower than what was estimated last year. So that decreased to $16.5 billion. This year's net taxable value, $18.9 billion, almost $19 billion. That's an 11.56% increase over last year's certified amount and 14.5% over the final taxable amount. New value or improvements added to the tax rolls, $720 million. Of that amount, about $184 million is located in the TERS. The rest is new value that was outside of TERS that the city gets to take advantage of for subsequent years. This bar chart just shows the growth of our assessed value over the last 9 years. And for the first 7 years, we're just showing normal standard growth that we've seen in the past, probably range between 5% and 9% annually. Good growth, and we lived within that growth. And you'll see where the city's been able to maintain a flat tax rate and then live with the additional revenue that's generated by the growth in our values. In 2022, that big bump is the annexation of Castle Hills properties and the first year impacts of those market value increases that we're seeing in property values. The growth in 2023 is strictly growth in the values of the properties that it's out there. You know, the hot market has been increasing those property values quite significantly. Because of the last 2 years' significant growth and the tax caps that were put in place in 2021, we've been restricted or limited on the tax levy and the rate that we've been able to approve for the year. So, and it's no different this year, and we'll show the impacts from that. This is just a chart showing the trend in improvements over the last 9 years. Again, we've had some pretty good regular growth from 2014 through 2022 as property came on the rolls. We saw a big increase in 2023. There's usually a lag of when properties are completed, developments are completed, and it gets put on the tax rolls. So we're seeing a lot of that catch up in 23, and with the amount of development that's on the ground right now, we would expect similar, maybe not to the tune of 720 million, but similar strong growth over the next couple of years in new improvements for the city's assessed value. This next table shows the breakdown of property values. This is at market value level based on the category of property. So single family, multifamily, industrial, personal property values. And I've highlighted a number of the lines here that just show the more significant portions of our tax base and how they've changed over year over year. The city's single family accounts for about 46% of the value, and then the others, you can see there are corresponding amounts there. What I do want to point out again, and I mentioned it earlier, is that total appraised value that's under review. So if you go to the third column and the seventh column, you'll see the 2022 under review and the 2023 under review. And you can see last year it was at $2.081 billion, and for this year it's $218 million. Again, kudos. I think Denton CAD specifically is moving in the right direction as far as how they're managing their appraisal process, and then the benefit to the cities and to us specifically is we don't have as much uncertainty that's built into the budgeting process. These next two slides show the pie charts of the breakdown as a total dollar amount and as a percent of the total of the information that was provided on the previous table. So we have major categories broken down by single family, multifamily, commercial, business personal property, and other. And you can see that just by looking at it, that the relative proportions, amounts of each of those categories, while they've all increased, they've generally stayed about the same. So that is the market values, and this is the percentages. Now you can see for single family that the increase has gone up about 2.2%, but generally the rest of the categories have remained with minimal changes from the previous year to this year. This slide shows the number of residential parcels that we have according to the appraisal district and pulled from our City of Lewisville metrics page. What we've been asked to do is provide the number of single-family residential parcels, break it out by the number of non-rental versus rental properties, and within the rental properties, the percentages that are corporate-owned or individually owned. So the total number of single-family residential parcels grew to a little over 26,000. Of that amount, 21,200 or 81% are non-rental, and about 19% or 4,800 are rental properties. Now that is a change from the previous year when the non-rental properties accounted for not just, but 77%. So what's happening is as these new residential properties are coming online, more of them are single-family residences that are being lived in rather than are being used as a rental property.
Can I ask a question about this real quick? So when I first got on council, I got hit a couple times with a theory from some folks that out-of-town corporations and foreign corporations were snapping up property and driving housing pricing up, land properties up. And when I look at this, I don't see that in this data. I see we have 81% as non-rental, so this is people living in the household. And I see even when I look at the rentals, 20% is rental, but 70% is individually owned. And even that 30% that's corporate owned, those are probably, the bulk of those I suspect are LLCs of people protecting their personal liabilities. So I'm not seeing any evidence that foreign investors, people from New York and California driving up property prices in Lewisville. And could you opine on that at all?
I'd agree with that assessment. I think the number of corporate owned is going to be less than that. when you really look at it. And I think the price increase or the value increase has been driven by the market in total and just where we're located in the growth.
Thank you.
Patrick, I was talking with some of the local realtors, and one of the statistics that they're seeing right now is about 1 in 5 investors. So 20% of the people buying housing right now are investor-based. So it kind of lines up with that 19%. It's kind of interesting to see some of those patterns.
Thank you.
Okay, this has always been a great go-to graphic for us, and if you went back another 10 years, it would be pretty much the same. As I had mentioned before, council has relied on property value growth, maintaining a flat tax rate to generate the additional revenue to support the budget. Beginning in this year and probably years moving forward, we're probably going to see, we know we're going to see a decrease in the rate for fiscal year 23-24, and likely to see decreases moving forward for a number of reasons. The way the housing values and just properties in general are increasing, and the impacts from Senate Bill 2 from 2021, where they reduced the voter approval rate increase from previous year from an 8% growth to 3.5% growth. So this is the first year that we're really seeing the impacts, that we're having to make an adjustment in, budgeting philosophy and the money that we have available then for unfunded projects. This is also an oldie but goodie. This is what we show every year. This is our tax rate compared to our survey cities. And historically, we've always been in the lower quartile, and take great pride in that. The burden on the property tax or the property owner, it's not as significant as maybe another community. What I will tell you is that while we're going to go from 44 cents to somewhere around 41.9 cents, it doesn't mean our position is going to drop on this table. I think relatively our position is going to remain the same because other communities are also experiencing the same thing that we're doing, and they're being required to lower their rates. So while our rate's going to go down to 41 cents, I think everybody else is going to kind of move in lockstep, and we're going to end up in the same place that we were right now.
I would invite people to put this chart together with the what we looked at earlier with the value for money that we saw where we were number one in the area. So combine the low rate with the value you get for living in Lewisville. I think that tells a great story. So I just invite people to look at those two things together.
This is a snapshot of what the 22 property tax rates looked for the property owner. You had the city of Lewisville, Denton County, and Lewisville ISD portions. Again, this is something that I think is going to change dramatically, not only because of the decreases that cities and counties are going to be dealing with for their tax rate calculations, but also not quite sure how all the legislative changes impacting the school property valuations and the additional exemptions and the compression that they're there. So we'll probably know a little bit more in the next couple months about how that's impacting Lewisville ISD, and then once we get that, we'll make sure we communicate that out to everybody. This slide shows what the impact of 1 cent is on a reduction or an increase in our property tax rate. It was more relevant in previous years when we had more flexibility in assigning our or approving our final tax rate. This year we don't have as many options because of, and what you'll see in a minute, how we've had to lower our tax rate to be in compliance with the voter approval rate. But if the city were to increase or reduce their tax rate by 1 cent, it would either generate or decrease revenues by $1.9 million. That's quite a significant hit to the city of Lewisville's budget. You'll see later where we're looking to request a recommendation to approve a voter approval rate as our tax rate, and it's only going to generate an additional $1.6 million to support ongoing operations. While it's very significant to the city, that 1 cent, the impact to the average home annually is less than $4. So again, just something to kind of keep in mind as we move forward with the discussion on the tax rates. Excuse me. So this table shows the property tax options that we have right now. In the past, you would see a number of additional tax rate options, giving council a little bit more flexibility in what you could do or what you could recommend. So what we have here are the first two are basically just budgetary type rates. It shows what the rate would need to be if we would just wanted to maintain the base rate or the base budget right now with no additional unfunded items. The other is the current rate. What would the revenue generate from being able to maintain the current rate applied on the current year's assessed value? That's no longer applicable or possible because that exceeds our voter approval rate. The next three rates are the total no new revenue rate, the amount that would be generated if we were just going to levy at that level, the voter approval rate, and then the voter approval rate with unused increment. And they all generate a different amount of revenue. Let me just walk through the table real quick. The first two columns are the O&M rate and the debt rate. Those are the rates that applied against the property value that generate the amount of the tax, property taxes. The third column is the total O&M levy. This is the amount of levy that's generated from the O&M rate before we pull out money that we then transfer to the TERS. I think it's just important to note that amount there and how much is ultimately getting contributed to the TERS. The fourth column is the tax freeze. The tax freeze is an additional amount that we get from properties that have been frozen because of a couple different things. One, they're over 65 or disabled persons. So once that property is frozen, then the amount of taxes that we get from that is not going to change. So that's not in the normal calculation of the levy, so that's an additional amount that we get. The next column is the amount that we are transferring out for TERS. So at the voter approval rate with the unused increment, the TERS amount that's being transferred to support those TERS funds is a little over $8 million, which leaves $56.1 million in general fund revenue that's available for supporting not only operations, but then additional unfunded amounts. The next column is the amount that's generated for the property tax to cover our debt service. That's not our total debt service. We actually have about $29 million in annual debt service payments, but about $6 million of that is coming from other revenue sources. So we're actually subsidizing the payment of debt using 4B funds and TERS funds, which is a good thing. We're getting alternate revenues to support rather than placing that burden on the residents. And then we have the combined rate, and then that second to the last column shows the additional general fund revenue that would be used to support unfunded programs or unfunded items on the unfunded list. So obviously, if we set the rate at the base, we would get $0 in additional revenue to use. Up to, if we go with the voter approval rate, we would have a little over $1.6 million available to then assign, council could assign them to those unfunded items. Any questions before I move on? So what's the impact to the resident, typical homeowner, for the various different options? So the tax rates, you can see at the base rate, based on the new value, they would see an increase in their tax bill of about $162. If we go with the voter approval with unused increment option at $419.079, the increase is $166.09. That's just comparing the rate if it had been in place last year against last year's value, against the same rate against this year's value. The actual increase, moving from last year's average value and current rate at the time, is $1,620. With the new value and the new voter approval rate, that amount goes up to $1,697. So it's an actual increase if your home values are represented here. You're going to see about a $77 increase in your tax bill. And then just one other piece of information, we were able to get the median taxable value, which shows basically where are we at middle point of our taxable values, and that actual value is $351,000. So for the typical homeowner that's closer to the median, their tax bill's a little under $1,475.
All right, so our recommendation on setting the tax rate is to levy the voter approval rate with unused increment, and that is the .419079. The purpose for that is primarily because the no new revenue rate is going to lower your base budget revenue and is going to require more funding from your debt reserves that we don't currently have available, which is recommended not to have that available from a financial standpoint. Also because of the needs on the unfunded list, and also to support our maintaining of our bond rating. So the rate breakdown is .2966759 for O&M, .122320 for INS. And if you were to levy that voter approval rate with unused increment, that rate is going to provide you with an extra $1,608,263 in ongoing revenue that you can allocate towards your unfunded list. So we'll go to the unfunded list again. So we looked at that dollar amount and tried to figure out how could you get the most bang for your buck. And on this unfunded list, if you're interested in funding these options. And so we are proposing that you can fund all of these, if that's the will of council, by using a strategy of breaking apart the operating costs, the ongoing costs, along with the one-time costs, because each one of these carries with it one-time costs and ongoing costs. So from that you can see at the top, the 1.6 million. This is your ongoing costs related to these. Now, you will notice you can't fund everything, and I commented about this earlier, is that funds for street and alley infrastructure. So basically, what I'm doing in this proposal is balancing off that dollar amount. This would not be an ongoing practice for the city of Lewisville. This is because we are in a crunch due to the compensation study implementation carrying over from this current fiscal year, as well as some of the other big projects that, such as our AMI project, as well as our portable radio projects. So with those added together, we feel like this year funding that at $987 is doable. So go to the next slide. But that leaves your one-time costs that are associated with each one of those. And so we pulled those apart, and we can use general fund balance to pay for the remainder of that. So we are putting forward a recommendation to fund, to set it at that tax rate, but also to fund all of your unfunded in this capacity. But I wanted to take a moment to have council give their thoughts and direction to staff, and we can work through those, and then obviously at the end, we can take a vote on whatever it is the decision of council.
Council?
Well, I'll jump in. I think all of the unfunded items on the list are very important. They go from our priorities of making sure that we have staff retention. Obviously, the blocking apparatus to make sure that we keep our public safety, our firefighters safe. I think that one's a no-brainer. But I think each issue, each item has a general use that's beneficial for the city, and we can afford to do it. I kind of was writing down on the list here, like the compensation is obvious because we've talked about how we want to keep, maintain our staff. We stay lean, but we want to make sure that we keep our staff because it's cheaper and less expensive to maintain staff than to hire new staff. The infrastructure, obviously, that's an ongoing thing. This is a small item that we'll figure out new ways to deal with next year, but the infrastructure issue is very, very important, I think. We're watching the streets, this heat just destroys new streets and old streets. So it's something that's going to be a priority as we go forward, so I think this is important. All of the other things, I mean, even the Lewisville chatbot box. I think that's an interesting way to provide public service. I use the website pretty frequently, and sometimes I still have problems finding stuff. And the way that thing works is it gets better over time, and if we get our residents to help us, it'll be a very effective tool. So I'm in support of all the recommendations and how we're going to benefit and get that paid out.
Thank you, sir.
And I'll shut up.
I'll jump in too. I agree with everything that Brandon just said. And I would support all of these unfunded items. And I appreciate the staff's work in coming up with a creative solution for being able to do it.
So I just want to back up for a minute for those who may be watching and looking at the tax comparison and the options that we just talked about. Obviously, the no new revenue rate is going to be the lowest option to go. So I'm sure there are some folks out there wondering why are we not considering that option? And I know we keep talking about the bond rating and why that's important. And we all know that it's important that we maintain that bond rating because we get better rates when we finance things. That is woven into everything we've talked about, particularly with our infrastructure plan, right? Because we know we're going to have to, we can't cash fund all of that. So when we have we're going through the analysis and we're setting out the level that we need to be funding to meet our infrastructure needs in the next 10 years, that's assuming that we have the bond rating, right? So if we lose that bond rating, right now we're sitting in a great position because we're funding that 10 years out at the current rate that we're going. If that bond rating moves, that makes a very big difference. And I don't know if we have an order of magnitude on what that is. Do we?
I can pull that information, or I can get that information from our financial advisor, but there is a significant increase in the interest rates that you are able to obtain when you're a AAA versus a AA plus, and it incrementally increases as you go down each grading.
So essentially what that means, we're already in a place because of inflation that with the same amount of money, we accomplish a lot less than we did 2 years ago. If we lose our bond rating, it's going to be even worse. So we don't want to make a bad situation worse. So that is why we always talk about the bond rating being extremely important. And I think I'll just say, as a council member, I won't speak for everyone else, but I feel like one of my absolute top priorities is making sure that we're making decisions that keep that bond rating intact. So for me personally, that is why I cannot consider the no new revenue rate as an option. With that, also considering that the no new rate option means that we have to go back into the base budget and start pulling things out. And really, there's no fat to be trimmed there. So that is why we just can't go that option. I do think that, honestly, I think that there's some meat on the unfunded list. So I think we've got to fund those things. There's nothing in the unfunded list that I can say we don't need, just as Councilmember Jones was saying. So I am, of course, you know how I feel about infrastructure funding. I hate that we kind of have to cut back the infrastructure funding as much as we have. However, with all the analysis that we have ongoing, I do feel much more comfortable knowing that we are currently funding the 10-year, so and that we're continuing to update those metrics and we're keeping an eye on that, and that we're not going to keep doing this every single year with the infrastructure budget. So that's how I feel a little bit more comfortable saying I'm all right with using that to balance out everything else. So with that, I fully support the staff's plan to fund the unfunded list as presented.
I do too. I would like to piggyback and just say something. What all three of them have said so far, I completely agree with. With the legislature doing what they've done this year and not knowing where that's going to play out next year after the general election, if we go all the way down, just for the sake of saying we went all the way down, we're not taking care of Lewisville and the future, present or future needs, for that matter. If we put off fixing things until tomorrow, those things end up costing twice as much. So the wisest thing that we can do is exactly what I think that most of us are agreeing on right now. We have to try to stay at least, if not ahead of the game, at the game. And I have no idea when all the voter stuff comes in, what impact that's going to have on the final bill. What is our, with all the deductions and everything next year, what is that going to leave us as far as a budget package? And I would hate to be building a structure from a basement floor when we're already right here. I just don't want to dig as a hole for the sake of saying I did.
Can we go back to the slide we were showing for Councilwoman Green? Fantastic. So this is something that I think gets overlooked sometimes by, and it certainly was by me before I got involved, that no new rate of 0.39, while the concept of rollback elections are great in theory, if you drop your tax rate too low, then it prevents you from being able to react in a timely fashion without going to a rollback election, which nobody's going to vote for new taxes anyway. So while the concept was interesting, and I appreciate what was trying to be done, it does force municipalities to be a lot more conservative than maybe they would have been if we wouldn't have to go to election to adjust our tax rate as we need to run the city. So I do think that I'm always cognizant of it goes low. I like it, but if we have to react, now we got to go to election to get the tax rate where we need to run the city, and I would like to avoid that if we can.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And I'll just say one thing about that is you'll be at least a year behind because of the time frame that we have. You'll be a year in arrears trying to play catch up because we're in an unnatural economic cycle where we haven't have a downturn in years, and we're due and it's not hitting. So you don't want to be playing around with that rate to say you've lowered the rate. And then you basically cause the city more debt. We have to go debt finance stuff. Then we're putting our public safety folks, how do we fund that? Because that's a major part of our budget. So we just want to be cognizant. We want to keep the rate. We want to be able to explain, and I think we can, everything that we're funding. I think we can defend everything that we're funding, and it's for the city, and it's going to make the city better. It's going to help keep staff. It's going to help our public safety people. And we are staying out of debt. We're having the ability to fund these one-time things and having a positive impact on the city. So I'm very comfortable with being able to explain this to our citizens and residents. I just wanted to make sure I throw that in there because of how the legislature has put us on a timetable. We need to make sure that we can afford the things we need and not go into debt.
I'm definitely in support of all staff recommendations. I think everything's already been said. All good points. Councilmember Jones definitely has some good points here a second ago as well. And I think that definitely excited about the website chat feature. I think that's an important thing. And just keep up the pace with infrastructure. I think, as we said, looks like we're on the closer to the lower bound. Hopefully we can get closer to the upper bound.
So I was here the last time there was a downturn, and I watched cities like Fort Worth have to go through massive reductions in personnel and services for residents. Fort Worth just happens to be one of the more visible ones, but many, many cities, and they did it for many, many reasons. Some of them were where they averaged the last 3 years' worth of tax increases and counted that as an average, whereas we don't. We look at last year's, and that's what we budget off of. Some of them had to, not just reduce people, but had to reduce actual services. So you didn't, people were responding to emergencies slower. Lewisville never has to do that, has never had to do that. We might have to tighten our belts in other ways, but we've never had to lay people off and create those types of challenges. And it's because we manage our money in a very conservative and fiscally responsible manner. What that no new revenue rate, while it's political language, what it's really telling you is that things don't cost more today than they did yesterday. And I don't know of any city that magically lives in a financial bubble. Everything costs more as you continue to move, so it's being able to manage that and have the smallest impact we can on residents. We understand the issues and the challenges with increased taxes and increased property values. That's why many years ago, the city of Lewisville actually put in a tax freeze for residents who are 65 and older. So our seniors are actually quite well protected compared to the vast majority of cities around us who don't put in a freeze. They've actually just put in a number, much like a homestead exemption. They have like a seniors exemption, and it's a dollar value, not a freeze, which is very, very different when we're talking about the inflationary pressures on housing costs today. So I appreciate council's support of the budget. I appreciate all the hard work. I don't have any questions or objections to what's been laid out today.
Okay. The next one. And then finally, on your unfunded list for your hotel motel fund is your Rocktober Halloween event. Just wanted to get input from council on that.
All in support. That looks awesome. I can't wait to see that.
I just appreciate Patrick allowing us to have a picture of him on this slide.
Definitely in support of the Rocktober again. This was actually the Here Come the Mummies band, so it was a great band. Hopefully we can have a more broad event, but I think the one-day idea is a great idea. Hopefully the weather holds out.
Any other comments?
I'm all for the Rocktober. The constituents I talked to would like to see it extended to 4 events, but one is better than none. Definitely for it.
Thank you, council. Looks like we've got a consensus here. We're going to go ahead and move on to discussion of the utility rates. Don't let those desserts, in fact, there's a lot of ice cream sitting over there that's probably getting melty. We want to make sure you get some. Who's up?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to just have a couple introduction slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris Eckroot. He's with NewGen. We've used their consulting services. You probably are familiar with that. Kristen, they did the infrastructure study, assisted with that, and with the refresh we just did. They did the wholesale rate studies previous to the annexation. They helped us kind of introduce Castle Hills to the rate structures for the city of Lewisville, and then now on an annual basis, they're with us helping update the rates to make sure that we've got support for operations and capital moving forward. So just a real quick couple slides, and then I'll turn it over to Chris. So these next 2 tables show the average monthly water and sewer charges and the percent increase year over year. And just I want to point out a couple things. One is the bond rating agencies even comment when providing their ratings to us that council is receptive to regular increases in the rate to avoid spikes and to provide additional revenue to support the operations. That's one. And two, we've been doing these rate studies for a number of years now, and how we've just completed this most recent study, we're using the final year of the most recent one to carry us into this next study. There's some other assumptions that we made and some changes regarding being fully funded out of current operations for the cash funding by the end of this study period. And regarding Castle Hills, when we brought them on, the evaluation showed that we did not have to increase those rates for a number of years, and it still holds. There's still that justification for the differences in the rates because there's some additional cost structure for the Castle Hills rates that you don't see with the legacy customers. But I believe for the next 2 or 3 years, you'll still be able to hold those rates at that amount, and then before you start seeing an increase. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Chris Eckert with New Gen Strategies and Solutions. Pleasure to be with you today. This is actually my second council meeting today, so there are others going through the same exercise that you're going through. As we jump into utility rates today, I do want to remind you that while we are providing service to citizens, we are also operating a business. When you think about the utility, it is tracked in what's called a proprietary or enterprise fund within governmental fund accounting. So we have to think of it like a business. And for a business to be successful, we have to do certain things. First and foremost, revenues have to match or exceed expenses. No pun intended, but if we don't do that, we're underwater. The second thing we have to do is we have to make sure that we are watching our reserves. We're planning for a rainy day, literally. At some point, it's not going to be 112 degrees outside. It is going to start raining again. And when it rains, our revenues come down because people aren't watering. And so when that happens, we have to level out our cash flows. We have to make sure we have sufficient money to operate our utility. So we need to monitor our reserves as well. Third thing we have to do as a business is we have to reinvest in our business. We have pipes, we have plants, we have pumps. All of these things are expensive, and over time they will break down. So we need to make sure that we are reinvesting in that business over time. So again, all of those are goals as we look to our utility rates today. I did want to start just going back and looking what are your rates right now. You employ what's called a two-part structure of your utility rates on both the water and wastewater side. There is a fixed charge that every customer pays every month regardless of use, and you can see that varies based on the meter size. The idea behind this kind of structure is that a larger meter can place a greater instantaneous demand on the system. As that demand is placed on the system, that requires certain infrastructure for the city to maintain. In order to do that, that costs money. So again, the larger the meter, the more that infrastructure costs. And again, you can see what those charges look like by meter size. On the water side, we employ a volumetric rate, and that rate is an inclining block or conservation-based rate for residential customers. The goal here is to encourage conservation. How do we do that? We increase the price as we increase the volume of use. So customers move through these rate blocks as they use water. So again, we use that for residential, not for commercial. You may have some commercial customers that use water in an economic process. We don't want to disincentivize economic activity. We don't want to penalize economic activity. That's why we use the structure that you see here. But again, we are trying to encourage conservation, sending a price signal. As you use more water, you pay more. So relative to our water rate strategy, what have we done and what are we continuing to do? We're continuing to keep 2,000 gallons of water use. It's basically a water allotment as part of that minimum bill. The idea here is we want this water allotment in the minimum bill to basically protect our lower volume users, because our lower volume users are also sometimes our fixed income customers. So we want to keep that in the minimum bill. At the same time, we are slowly increasing those meter size, those charges on a meter size basis. Those are going up because, again, we're trying to better reflect our infrastructure investment. So we are phasing into some equivalency factors that are recommended by the American Water Works Association. On the volumetric side, we're continuing to phase into this volumetric rate structure, this inclining block or conservation-based rate structure. You can think of it like an incline. When we first started this structure, the incline was not great, and we are slowly increasing that incline over time, trying to send a better conservation signal to our customers. On the sewer side, not really changing anything of the structure. Again, you still have the two-part rate, the fixed charge, the variable charge. Our wastewater charges, on the volumetric side, that's based on winter average water use. For our commercial customers, it's based on actual water use. That's just industry standard charging. So again, we're doing the same thing here, maintaining 2,000 gallons in that minimum bill, not changing anything else other than increasing that rate over time. So what is driving our need for the rate increase that Dave has already talked about today? Ultimately, it comes back to capital. As I mentioned, when we're looking at our utility system, it is expensive. We have expensive items we need to reinvest in those items, and so that, again, is the major driver. It really comes back to capital. You've already talked about debt rating agencies. You've already heard about this today. We want to maintain that bond rating, and so part of maintaining that bond rating is looking at how we're funding our capital items. Are we using debt? Are we using cash? How are we going about that? And we want to be smart about that because the debt rating agencies do want us to use a reasonable capital structure and use some element of cash funding. But as I said, because these projects are expensive, we have to use debt on some of these projects. And so that's what you see on the screen right now is basically the funding plan going forward for these capital items, the amount of bond-funded capital, the amount of cash-funded capital. To the extent you have the capability to increase the cash-funded amount going forward, we'd always recommend that where it makes sense, where it's reasonable. But again, we have to also keep an eye to affordability of service to our customers. And so that's all part of what's driving this is the capital funding plan. So with that, what is our recommendation? Again, you can see we've broken this out between our legacy customers as well as our Castle Hills customers. So you see the increases there for our legacy customers going forward. Minor increases every year. This is the fixed charge. Yes, sir.
And I want to be clear on that for those who are maybe watching or see this at a later time. This is not picking out a particular part of the city. The Castle Hills part of the city has a different water service provider that we have brought in as part of the contract. So they have a very different infrastructure and cost basis that we have to manage. So that, just to be clear, they're not being treated special or uniquely. It's because of the history of how that part of the city developed.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate that distinction.
I'll put my mic back because I was going to do that same thing. So.
I apologize, I glossed over that point, but that is very valid.
All right, most of us here in this room understand that.
Right.
We live through it, but as we move forward, when these pop up, I just want to be clear on it. So
Absolutely.
No blame on you.
No, I appreciate that. So again, this is the rate plan right now for the fixed charge. And again, that is the Lewisville legacy customers. You see then the volumetric changes that we're proposing going forward. Again, we're only looking for action for fiscal year 24. This is just giving you a look into the future based on what we know right now. So these are the anticipated volumetric rates going forward. As I've said before, highly recommend you look at rates every year. Pricing is not a once and done exercise. We don't just look at it one time and stick with it for 5 years. Things change over time. I tend to joke that, I didn't foresee small things like a global pandemic happening, right? That wasn't in our rate plans back in 2019. So things change over time. We need to make sure that we monitor this over time. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so before we move on here, can you give us an idea of what percentage of our citizens live in the 15 to 35,000 band, or where do the bulk of our citizens live in this?
The bulk of your citizens really are falling in that first tier, that first block. I don't have those percentages with me today, but I can get those to you. But again, predominantly you're falling in the first block. You may have some getting into the second block during the summer. As you get to those top blocks, you're looking probably 1% or less at that 50,000 gallons.
States with water features and stuff like this. Okay. I'm sorry.
When we first did this, we were in the upper 90s for the legacy Lewisville customers, they were smaller users monthly. You're still in the mid-90s for the Castle Hills customers. So as Chris mentioned, most of them are falling in that first tier rate.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. So relative to the Castle Hills service area, again, you do not really see any changes here until you get out to 2028. We're still going through this process of trying to align their charges over time, recognizing those pricing differentials. But again, we also made a commitment to those customers that those rates would be held constant for a time, reflecting those price differentials, and so we're continuing on as part of that rate plan. These are the volumetric rates here recommended for 2024. You begin to see some minor changes coming in here in 2025. That's what we anticipate right now as part of that alignment. That could change over time. So again, that's why we look at this, but just noting we are starting to get to the point where in the future, possibly as early as 2025, we may start seeing some minor changes here for the Castle Hills customer group. On the sewer rate side, again, you see the proposal here. Again, small changes across the board as we go forward. And then you see also the Castle Hills customer rates here as well. And again, no change there anticipated until possibly fiscal year 27. That's what we're anticipating right now. So ultimately, what does this mean to a customer? Obviously, we've been through a lot of rates, but what matters, what customers look at, is going to be that number on the bill. And so what we use here is we go in and we look at an average customer. Here for an average customer, we're assuming 10,000 gallons of water use, 6,000 gallons of wastewater use. Right now, 10,000 gallons of water, 6,000 gallons of sewer, that's $78.08. That is what that bill is. Our proposal is to take that to $81.41. That's an increase of $3.33 a month. On a percentage basis, you're looking at slightly over 4%. What's very interesting is we go in and we track industry trends. We also look at an index that the Federal Reserve, St. Louis branch of the Federal Reserve tracks, that is a water, sewer, and trash index. And when you go and you look at that index over time, going all the way back to 1990, it's running right now in terms of about 4% average annual change every year. So you are tracking with this level of increase, you're basically tracking with the rest of the country right now. While we look at that to assess the adequacy of changes and are we aligned, we still want to make sure that we are meeting our capital plan and doing what's right for our community going forward. But again, that's the proposed change, that's the impact to customers there. Just a different graphic kind of showing what that looks like going forward, that linear trend. But then we also have for you today a commercial customer. Here, this is 70,000 gallons of use for this commercial customer. This is a larger meter. This is a 2-inch meter. So again, that change year over year for 70,000 gallons of use, $27.03. Then going forward to an industrial customer, very large user, 2-inch meter, 278,000 gallons of use, less than $75 a month for 278,000 gallons of use here. So with that, I'm going to stop and see, are there any questions, anything I can answer for you at this point?
Can we go to the next slide? So on this slide, Council, this just shows us where we are in comparison with the moves we're proposing to make. So Lewisville Current is obviously a second from the bottom in costs, and our proposal is to move it just slightly up. I will say, though, that, you know, we made these changes last year as well, and everyone moved at the same time. So we stayed at our relative rate, and I would imagine, or comparison, I would imagine that's going to probably be the same thing. I think you're working with several clients that are
Yes, have a number of clients on this list. So again, we are comparing your future rate to everybody's rates today. Everybody's going through this exercise right now.
And there's Castle Hills right in the middle of the pack of our comparison cities, but I will say that when, upon annexation, they were higher up. So because we have been keeping them consistent, they are showing the benefit over time. And ultimately, with this plan, we will end up converging those to where they're comparable with one another in the future. So with that, Council, I just wanted to make sure, obviously, we plan to bring this back to you every single budget year, so you'll get a bite at the apple every single budget year. But it is helpful for staff to know that you're in general support or not in general support of kind of this plan, so that we can plan accordingly going forward, so we have some predictability going into the budget seasons.
Council?
I'll start off in general support. This is nice. It's understandable. Yeah, I don't see any reason to object to this. I like it.
I support it. I guess, understanding what an enterprise fund is helps, and that explanation, I think, will help to explain how that operates and the rationale behind it. I'm in support of it. It only makes sense to make sure that we have the funding that we need to reinvest and take care of our residents as we need to.
I'm in support.
I'm in support.
I support it.
I'll just go back to what I said about the bond rating before. In order to protect the bond rating, we have to support it.
And I look at this through a slightly different lens, because having grown up where I grew up, we have a bounteous amounts of water. And that is going to change here in North Texas. And this summer if it hasn't impacted your lawn and everything else, you're probably spending a lot of money on evaporation. So I would like to just put a dot on this to say, staff, everything that you guys have been doing to help educate and give people options on the other side, because it's all well and good to tighten and use the market signaling, but some folks just don't understand, well, how can they change? What can they change? And so giving us the educational tools on the other side to help people make that change or that adjustment, realize that it's not a huge life impact, to make some relatively small changes, or some bigger ones if they want to go that route. They can still pay for their really, really green lawn, but understand that there's options. So I really appreciate that we're looking at this from both sides, not just a market pricing side, but also tools to help people move and adjust to the market with their behavior. So thank you.
Okay, I just have a few remaining slides here on the stormwater drainage fees. This is a study that we conducted last year. We hadn't done anything with rates as far as stormwater fees since they were instituted in fiscal year 2018. So we took our first look back in '22. New Gen was there to assist us with that project. We wanted to make sure, we wanted to see if the performance of the stormwater system was tracking the initial projections when it was put into place. The goal of the study, again, was to determine what, if any, adjustments were needed for the to the rate. So what we did is we did an inventory of the current projects that were outstanding and on the horizon, and there's $66 million of drainage projects within the next 10 years when we did the study last May, and another 26 million that were beyond that. So using that information, a study was conducted to make a recommendation that the council approved last year. It was a 3-year plan to increase the rates to support stormwater drainage or repairs. I will note that some of this might change slightly. We have currently the Blue Ribbon Committee that's been meeting, and we're going to be meeting at the end of this month to make a recommendation on projects that we're going to bring forward for the bond program. But there's also going to be a number of drainage projects that are going to be solely supported by the drainage fee. So this is year 2 of the 3-year plan for rate adjustments. Last year, we increased the residential rate by $1 from $4 to $5 per month, and the non-single family, went from $1.43 to to 179. The proposed rates for year 2 has the single-family residential going up $1 to $6 per month, and the non-single family going up 35 cents to $2.14. The next couple slides here show the projects that were considered when we set the rates back last year. A number of them have not changed. There may be some that might be swapped out for a higher priority project, but right now we're still going with this listing and the needs for the stormwater system. So this is the comparison similar to what you saw for the water and sewer rates, where we put ourselves in relation to our survey cities currently at $5, which puts us right in the middle. With the proposed rate increase for residential properties, it goes to $6. But again, similar to the water and sewer, we know that there's a number of communities out there also doing similar studies, and we feel that even with the rate increase, that we're going to end up in the same relative position right in the middle of our survey cities. We were asked last year to also provide not only the impact to the residential properties, but for the non-residential, that economic development portion of our payers. Want to be sensitive to that as well. So you can see we've got comparisons for small, medium, and large parcels, and you've got some names there that show what those may be. The fee for 2023, the fee for 24, the amount of the change, the current monthly fee, and the new monthly fee. And you can see that similar to the increases for the water and sewer, we're very mindful of the increases that we're placing on our retail and commercial industrial customers.
I did want to point out, though, that there are ways that business owners are able to do certain things to be able to reduce that. You want to talk about that, Dave? Do you have any examples of that? Or there's a whole list of them. Sorry, I just dropped that on him. There's a
So this was in our presentation last year, and it would have been a good thing to include in here. But there are a number of ways that a customer can reduce their stormwater fee, providing their own stormwater retention, some other things. If you want specifics, I can provide that for you. But again, there's something that the customer can do to relieve them of that fee.
Thank you. Okay, so with our recommendation, we want to continue with our year 2 increases of that 3-year plan that you guys had approved before. So that is to basically ensure that we have the appropriate capital funding to move forward with these projects over the next 10 years. So that projected increase in revenue would be $1,079,000, and I believe the increase is it $1? Is it $1 this year?
It's $1 for the residential and 35 cents for the non-residential.
Council, I'll entertain a motion.
I have a motion to approve the preliminary budget as presented and amended, which includes expenditures based on a total tax rate of .419079, a 4.3% increase in water and sewer rates, a $1 increase in the stormwater drainage rate for single-family residential properties, and a 35-cent increase in the per 1,000 square foot of impervious area rate for non-single-family residential properties.
Second?
A motion and a second. Council, any discussion? If there is none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item 2, set and announce the date and times for the public hearing on the budget vote, vote on the budget, and public hearing and vote on the tax rate. It looks like I think the estimated date that we need is September 11th, 2023 at 7 p.m. Would be the recommended. and that we hold the vote on the budget on September 11th, 2023 at 7 p.m. Public hearing and vote on the tax rate at the September 18th, 2023 City Council meeting at 7 p.m. and set, as set on the previously approved budget calendar is what we have. So I'll entertain a motion on the dates and times.
To make a motion that the City Council hold a public hearing and vote on the budget at the September 11th, 2023 City Council meeting at 7 p.m. and hold a public hearing and vote on the tax rate at the September 18th, 2023 City Council meeting at 7 p.m.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 3, acceptance of the 2023 certified tax rolls in accordance with Section 26.04 of the Texas Tax Code. The 2023 certified tax rolls from Dallas and Denton County appraisal districts combined for a total market value for all property of $25,372,316,201 and an assessed value of $24,002,820,990 and a total taxable value of $18,956,387,907. Our TIF zone number 1 taxable value is $488,725,331. TIF zone number 2 taxable value is $273,024,906. TIF zone number 3 taxable value is $1,103,119,311, and TIF zone number 4 taxable value is $291,458,773. Our new construction included in the total roll is $719,788,145. Just an interesting side note, I think City of Plano is only about $5 million more than we are this year from a new development dollars. So that's quite a lot of work from city staff. We appreciate the investment from all the developers that have come by and invested in our city. But a huge thanks to staff, because I'm sure all the permitting and processes has been a heavy lift. It is recommended that City Council accept the 2023 tax rolls in accordance with Section 2604 of the Texas Tax Code. And Council, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
I got a motion and a second. Do we need any particular language for that, Liz, or are we good? Okay. I've got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. I'll entertain, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Item 4, acceptance of the report identifying the calculation of the 2023 no new revenue and voter approval tax rates, authorization to publish notice as required by the Texas Tax Code, Section 26.061, and provide direction as to the calculation of the voter approved tax rate. Section 26.061 of the Texas Tax Code requires that the calculated no new revenue tax rate and voter approved tax rate be submitted to the City Council, and that the notice of calculated no new revenue tax rate and voter approval tax rates be published in a newspaper having general circulation in the county in which the municipality is located. The calculated rates are as follows: 2023 no new revenue tax rate 0.392761 and 2023 no new revenue maintenance and operation rate 0.286104. The 2023 debt rate and 2023 voter approval rate to be published will be determined after the City Council deliberations. The calculations are 2023 debt rate 0.122320 and 2023 voter approval rate of 0.419079. It's recommended that the City Council accept the report identifying the calculation of the 2023 no new revenue and voter approval tax rates and authorize the notice publication as required by Texas Tax Code, Section 26.061.
So move.
I got a motion?
Second.
I have a motion and a second of the stated rate. Good? All right. Council, if there's any discussion, otherwise, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. City Manager, do we have any closed session?
We do not.
All right. As there is no additional action to be taken, I do want to just take a moment and, folks, we did have the funeral for Mayor Rudy Durham, and I just want to remind everybody that the Durham family, keep them in your hearts. He was a massive public servant and a huge pair of shoulders that the rest of us are standing atop of. So I want to thank him and his family for all their service to the community. And yeah, just keep them in their thoughts, because it's a tough hit when we lose someone like Rudy. His mark is everywhere on this city. So with that, as there is no additional action to be taken on today's agenda, we are adjourned.